Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, November 23rd, 2021. President Joe Biden ordering the release of 50 million barrels of oil from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve and getting commitments from other countries, including China, to also release oil. The goal, bringing down the high cost of energy, especially gas. House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, issuing more subpoenas to the leaders of right-wing groups that were there that day, including Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. And conspiracy theorist Alex Jones responding to the subpoena he received from the committee, vowing to fight on. Jury deliberations begin in the murder trial and the killing of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked what the Biden administration might say to the nation ahead of what is likely to be divisive verdicts, no matter which way they turn out. And the U.S. Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, returning from a trip to Ethiopia, talking about diplomatic efforts to end that country's civil war, or at least keep it from spreading. From the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. and 5 other countries, including China, will tap their national strategic petroleum reserves in an attempt to bring down gasoline prices that have become a sore spot with motorists and a big contributor to inflation, the White House said. The release had been anticipated for weeks as the White House grappled with how to address rising prices for gasoline, groceries, and other consumer products that have clouded prospects for Mr. Biden's agenda. That's how the Wall Street Journal reported it. The president making the official announcement from the Eisenhower Executive Office building next to the White House.
The big part of the reason Americans are facing high gas prices is because oil-producing countries and large companies have not ramped up the supply of oil quickly enough to meet the demand. And the smaller supply means higher prices globally for oil. To address these issues, I got on the phone with leaders from other countries grappling with this challenge to try to find ways to lower oil prices and ultimately to the price you pay at the pump. So today I'm announcing that the largest ever release from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help provide the supply we need as we recover from this pandemic. In addition, I brought together other nations to contribute to the solution. India, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the United Kingdom have agreed to release additional oil from their reserves, and China may do more as well. This coordinated action will help us deal with the lack of supply, which in turn helps ease prices. The bottom line, today we're launching a major effort to moderate the price of oil, an effort that will span the globe in its reach and ultimately reach your corner gas station, God willing. I've worked hard these past few weeks on calls and meetings with foreign leaders, policymakers, to put together the building blocks for today's global announcement. And while our combined actions will not solve the problem of high gas prices overnight, it will make a difference. It will take time, but before long, you should see the price of gas drop where you fill up your tank. And in the longer term, we will reduce our reliance on oil as we shift to clean energy. But right now, I will do what needs to be done to reduce the price you pay at the pump. From the middle class and working families that are spending much too much, and it's a strain. And you're the reason I was sent here to look out for you.
President Joe Biden in the Eisenhower Executive Office building right next to the White House. AAA saying the average price of a gallon of gasoline in the U.S. now is $3.40. A year ago, it was $2.11. And the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPR, is a network of underground storage tanks in Louisiana and Texas, created in 1975 after oil supplies were interrupted in the oil embargo of the previous 2 years. It has a capacity of over 700 million barrels of oil. Each barrel is 42 gallons. And a 1975 law gives the president the ability to draw down the reserve in the event of a severe energy supply interruption. More on today's action from the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm. She was in the White House briefing room.
To be really clear, obviously, the president does not control the price of gasoline. No president does. But what we're seeing right now is this global mismatch between supply and demand. Oil production is lagging behind as the rest of the economy roars back to life after the shutdown. So we and this administration are leaving no stone unturned as we examine the market to figure out what's behind the high prices. And that's one of the reasons why the president sent a letter to the FTC last week to ask them to investigate why there is such a huge price difference between the price of unfinished gasoline and then the average price at the pump. And he explained that a little bit in his remarks earlier, but if historical averages were true, today people would be paying about 30 cents less per gallon at the pump based upon the differential between unfinished gas and gasoline at the pump. So he's asked for the FTC to take a look at this. But this administration has been looking at every single tool that we can use to shield families from the rising costs of fuel. And, that's why the LIHEAP funds is a very important tool for low-income home energy assistance. The American Rescue Plan has additional funds to be able to help families pay their utility bills this winter. And, of course, the president today, as Jen just said, has announced that he's directing the Department of Energy to make up to 50 million barrels of oil from the nation's Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPR, available.
Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm in the White House briefing room. And more on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve oil release now with Washington Post economics reporter Jeff Stein. Thanks for joining us. Will this move bring down oil and gas prices?
I think the short answer is probably not. As you mentioned, Biden and the Department of Energy are going to release roughly 50 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. For context, the U.S. last year consumed roughly 20 million barrels per day. So, maybe some short-term price relief. What the White House is saying is that they are being strategic in coordinating a joint release of those 50 million barrels with other nations, Japan, Britain, India, also announcing similar commitments. But unless that number gets, above 100 million barrels, according to many of the energy experts I've spoken to, it's unlikely to materially lead to improvements at the pump. The good news for the Biden administration is there's other reasons to believe that energy prices might be coming down, particularly decline in demand from Europe and increasing of production that will put more supply online. But this move alone is probably not going to really make that big of a difference.
You write that it could trigger a showdown with other major oil-producing nations, which could allege the White House is attempting to improperly distort energy markets. Would that be a challenge just in the realm of politics, or is there some legal possibilities in this?
God, that's such a good question. I think it really is at core political. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, known commonly as OPEC, run in part by the Saudi government, has pushed back very strongly against this move. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve being tapped by the Biden administration is supposed to be for emergencies and sort of extraordinary situations. And what OPEC and the Saudis are saying is that this is not that. This is sort of just a political attempt by the White House to lower prices. And what's so important about that is if they feel like this move is in violation of their interest and that they want to hit back, they could really do so. OPEC could dramatically scale back production, and the U.S. still remains largely dependent on the Saudis and other foreign countries' oil production. And if these countries decide that they want to keep prices higher and think that this is sort of an unwarranted blow, they could make the situation a lot worse than if the Biden administration had done nothing, at least according to some of the analysts I've spoken to today.
What has been the Congressional Republican reaction? They've been attacking the White House over energy prices for a long time.
Yeah, the Republican response has been kind of interesting. Former President Trump had a long statement today, putting that aside because it was kind of hard to decipher in a couple of places. The thrust of the Republican response is that the Biden administration is not necessarily to blame for this move, although there has been criticisms of that, but that other parts of the administration's energy policies, shutting down oil and gas exploration off the coast, and sort of their push for clean renewable energy is causing prices to increase. There's a very long debate on both sides about the accuracy of that. Needless to say, the White House has been very adamant that all its efforts are focused on long-term transformations of the U.S. energy sector towards, what environmental groups and scientists believe is necessary to avoid, climate catastrophe. But saying that they'll maintain short-term prices for American consumers. Regardless of that intention, though, there is no doubt that prices are elevated. I think some of the rhetoric on this is overstated. Prices are about where they were about 10 years ago. It's not like we've never seen oil prices and gas prices this high, but people and middle-class people are really suffering from these high prices, particularly as the economy struggles to get back on its feet. And Republicans correctly, based on all the polling data that we've seen as well, see that there's a real acute vulnerability for the White House here.
We're talking with Jeff Stein with the Washington Post. Last week, the White House called on the Federal Trade Commission to investigate oil companies over high prices. Where does that stand?
Well, it's interesting because while the White House, has a lot of power and a lot of ability to do things, in this case, what they're really doing is proving contingent and dependent on the Federal Trade Commission, which is an independent body. They have been asking them to more, as you mentioned, aggressively investigate oil and gas company collusion. In particular, there's been some concern among liberals about anti-competitive behavior, particularly with regard to large mergers. 7-Eleven and Speedway, for instance, recently combined multi-billion-dollar deal. And the FTC is going to be looking into whether that is an effort that's in violation of sort of fair and free competition, and whether it is driving up prices. The White House has been arguing that essentially the inputs, the crude oil inputs in the global market are at a low price point right now. They're actually relatively cheap by historical standard, but that the price consumers are facing are higher, and that's troubling and suggests a disparity. Many economists and oil experts I have spoken to recently think that is maybe unfair, that the White House is maybe missing the fact that supply chains are strained and trucking is more expensive. And there are other explanations for why those could be those final prices faced by the consumers could be higher. But the White House is really hoping that at a minimum, this additional antitrust scrutiny will make these companies think twice before they raise prices even higher.
Jeff Stein is an economics reporter with the Washington Post. Find his stories at WashingtonPost.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, tweeting today as Americans are preparing for Thanksgiving, heating their homes, cooking food, driving to the store. Now more than ever, they are feeling the impacts of Biden's policy through rising energy costs. The left's obsession with canceling traditional energy is failing our economy. Senator Lankford tweeting a video as well from a news conference he and other Senate Republicans held last week on this issue.
Day one, they announced they're going to stop the Keystone pipeline, which is not just Canadian oil coming in, it's also coming in from Montana. They're going to stop leasing of federal lands. And they aggressively started doing the work behind the scenes to shut down the access to capital to anyone who wanted to be able to loan or give money to any entity that wants to expand pipelines. They put out the threat immediately about any permits, any regulatory help to be able to do anything with pipelines or expand anything with fossil fuels. John Kerry has recently announced that we're going to be done with coal by 2030, which may be a shock to a lot of folks that actually have coal-fired plants that are extended out for their life and amortization for the next 30, 40 years, that the administration is intentionally looking to be able to end that in 9 years. But it's not stopped with just raising the prices on the United States and on American citizens. Now they're trying to deal with the political consequences of what's going on. And so in a horrible foreign policy conversation, now Biden is talking about cutting off any kind of export of natural gas to any of our other countries. What will occur with that? They'll go to Russia to be able to get that natural gas, not to the United States, increasing dependence in Europe for Russia, which is a terrible geopolitical decision again. and it will put out the immediate threat that the Americans can't be trusted for energy policy, so don't trust them long term. The effect of that is raising the prices over there. It will continue to be able to hurt American producers that are here, and will continue to be able to kill American jobs and increase Russian jobs again, as this administration seems to be dead set in doing whatever it can to help the Russian economy with their pipelines and with their contracts in Europe, but hurting American producers at the same time. This is crushing the American economy in many ways, and it's crushing the American consumer. But it is absolutely by design to try to force people into using solar, wind, other things that are unreliable. Unless you think that this is just ended and it's just the White House, just today in the Energy and Natural Resources hearing today, there were multiple bills that were brought up for a vote that passed on a partisan vote today to continue to disallow the expansion of oil and gas leasing and new properties today. And though the conversation was, shouldn't we think about, at some point how we're going to deal with American energy, they just passed them right on and continued to be able to vote here today to be able to knock out American energy production on federal land still. This will be an issue. And as Americans pay more in Oklahoma for heating their homes this summer and this winter, as they pay for all that hot water tank and everything else, as they pay for their gas in their truck and their vehicle. This is a big issue for a lot of folks. And as they try to talk about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and releasing that for a few weeks to lower price, that is about short-term political gain, not actually helping the consumer long-term and American jobs.
Senator James Lankford, Republican, a bit of a news conference that he and other Senate Republicans held last week before they left for the Thanksgiving recess. Senator Lankford tweeting that today as President Biden announced that he is releasing up to 50 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in an effort to reduce gas prices. Bloomberg reporting developers of Keystone XL are seeking to recoup more than $15 billion in damages connected to President Joe Biden's decision to yank a permit for the border-crossing oil pipeline even after construction began. With a request for arbitration filed Monday, Calgary-based TC Energy Corporation formally opened one of the largest trade appeals ever against the U.S. and asked to put its long-running dispute over Keystone XL in front of an international arbitration panel. The legal claim is being mounted under provisions of the North American Free Trade Agreement that allow foreign companies to challenge U.S. policy decisions. That reporting from Bloomberg. On Wall Street today, the Dow was up 194, NASDAQ down 79, S&P up 7. Some COVID-19 news. Detroit's big three automakers, including General Motors, Ford, and the parent of Chrysler, Stellantis, announcing they are not going to mandate vaccines yet for thousands of workers. The United Auto Workers Union issuing a statement with the company saying that they would require masking at work sites. Despite not mandating the vaccinations, the unionized workers, though, will be asked to report their vaccination status on a voluntary basis. And the government of Spain and researchers there have agreed to allow other manufacturers to make their coronavirus antibody test. It's the first time any manufacturer has allowed its coronavirus test to be included in a technology pool set up by the World Health Organization. Could be a great benefit to poorer countries. And the WHO warning today there could be 700,000 more COVID deaths in Europe by next March. That would take the total there to over 2.2 million. This is Washington Today. From the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the jury selected for the trial of the three men charged in the death of Ahmaud Arbery has been given the case for deliberation following a final argument from the state's lead prosecutor. State prosecutors offered a rebuttal to the defense attorney's closing arguments, which were given on Monday. Arbery was shot and killed on February 23, 2020, after being chased through a neighborhood outside of coastal Brunswick in Glynn County. Travis McMichael, who shot Arbery twice with a shotgun, his father Greg McMichael, who initiated the chase, and their neighbor Roddy Bryan, all face murder charges in the death. As we wait for the verdict at the White House today, a question to the press secretary, Jen Psaki.
You spoke previously about the divisions in this nation as it relates to recent trial verdicts. What does this administration have to offer or say as we await the verdict in Georgia in the McMichael-Bryan case?
I'm not going to speak to any case that is where there has not been a verdict. And I'm sure we will have a comment once there is. But I will say broadly, April, that of course, as we've watched over the not just last year, obviously long before that, last few years, and we have seen violence on the streets. We've seen people lose their lives. The president has spoken himself many times to the case of Ahmaud Arbery. And while we're not going to speak to the particular an ongoing trial, I would point you to a long array of comments he's made about his horror in that case. And as it was asked earlier, one of the reasons he ran for president, as you've all heard him speak about, is to help bring the country together, to help address racial injustice in this country, help do that through whatever role the federal government can play. Doesn't expect that to be all done in the first year, but we're going to continue to press forward.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, part of her daily briefing. A question from April Ryan, White House correspondent for The Grio. Washington Today continues in a minute.
February 1964, President Lyndon Johnson tells Peace Corps Director Sergeant Shriver that he's going to lead the war on poverty.
Sarge, good morning, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm going to announce your appointment at press conference.
What press conference?
This afternoon.
Oh, God, I think it would be advisable, if you don't mind, if I could have this weekend, I wanted to sit down with a couple of people and see what we could get in the way of some sort of a plan, because what happens, at least my thought is that what happens is that you announce somebody or hear somebody else, and they don't know what the hell they're doing or what the program's going to be specifically, and who's going to carry it. Then you're in a hell of a hole, because they all start calling you up and saying, well, now, what are you going to do?
Well,
out and all that, and
just don't talk to them. Just go away and go to Camp David. Figure it out.
Hear this and more on C-SPAN's newest podcast, Presidential Recordings. Season 1 focuses on Lyndon Johnson, who recorded more than 800 hours of talks with his staff, members of Congress, and even his own family. Not everyone knew they were being recorded. Hear history as it happened on C-SPAN's Presidential Recordings. Find it and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now app and wherever you get your podcasts. Politico reporting the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol announced subpoenas Monday of Alex Jones, the head of InfoWars, and self-described dirty trickster Roger Stone, both high-profile Trump allies. The panel is also seeking information from rally promoters Dustin Stockton and Jennifer Lawrence and former President Donald Trump's current spokesperson, Taylor Budowich. Coming up, we'll talk with a Politico reporter, Nicholas Wu. First, though, Alex Jones posting a video response to the subpoena today.
I've told the listeners and viewers of InfoWars that the system's coming for us. And you know why? Because they're coming for you. This is the takedown of the Western world. This is a worldwide corporate tyranny destroying every form of liberty on this planet. Now, the January 6th committee, created by law by the Democrats as a witch hunt, has lied about myself and lied about so many other people I know and claimed that we wanted to attack the Capitol on January 6th. This is the same Democrats that say Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 black people and was a white supremacist. They're liars. But this is a criminal subpoena. This is something that Joseph McCarthy did to a lot of people in America. And it turned out some of the people he was targeting are actually guilty. When we talk about January 6th, this is even worse than what Joseph McCarthy did, and I believe he went too far. This is the absolute declaration of war against the American people and against free speech. They don't even care in this committee that I was there at the Capitol trying to stop what happened. No, they want to basically put me on trial in the corporate media, showing selective information so that when people hear the name Alex Jones, they think we're talking about an insurrectionist criminal when I am the opposite.
Alex Jones posting that video today. You heard a portion. Later in the video, he promotes a new website, Reset Wars, along with a 6-hour online course for his followers. A senior member of the January 6th Attack Investigative Committee, Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California, was interviewed on CNN Monday night about those subpoenas.
What is it that they know? What is it that the committee suspects that they know that would be helpful in terms of what you're trying to gain their perspective on? What holes are you trying to fill in what you know about what happened on January 6th and the lead up to January 6th?
Well, for example, Mr. Stone raised money for security through his website, stoptheseal.org. He reportedly had an affiliation with the Oath Keepers that led some of the assault on the Capitol. He made remarks that he was planning to lead the march to the Capitol from the ellipse that day. Mr. Jones claims to have raised the majority of the funds for the staging of the rally. So we want to find out what they know. We're following up with other leads that we have received about the funding. Taylor Budowich reportedly solicited a 501c3 organization to conduct a social media and radio advertising campaign to get attendance at the meeting. We want to know about that. Ms. Lawrence and Mr. Stockton helped organize a series of rallies in November and afterwards, and we want to know more about what they were doing and who was paying for that.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren on CNN Monday night. Politico congressional reporter Nicholas Wu has been following the January 6th attack investigation, and he joins us now by phone. Thank you so much. The headline on your story is Bannon indictment does little to jumpstart January 6th committee's subpoena talks with top targets. Reference to Steve Bannon. What's been going on?
Well, thanks for having me. It looks like after 2 months of negotiations with the committee and the Bannon indictment, unfortunately for the committee, they haven't been able to shake loose testimony from people like Dan Scavino and Mark Meadows, two of the people who have really held out here, and folks that were close to the president. Despite all of this talk from their lawyers about being engaged in negotiations with committee and the postponement of depositions and the punting of deadlines to try to come to some sort of agreement here, it doesn't seem like that's the case. And even with this threat of being held in criminal contempt of Congress being held over them.
So what does that say for the high-profile subpoenas that went out Monday night, Roger Stone and Alex Jones?
Yeah, so they're a little different because Roger Stone and Alex Jones, at least at the time of the events being examined by the January 6th Select Committee, were not members of the Trump administration, so they're not protected or subject to any of the legal claims that some of these guys like Scavino and Meadows are making about executive privilege and being part of, protected conversations in the executive branch. They were private citizens at the time. So, whatever legal claim they'll have here is much weaker in terms of their own compliance. But that being said, Alex Jones went out on his web show on Tuesday and said that, he didn't want to comply with the committee. So we'll see exactly what happens there. He said that he would try to, plead the Fifth Amendment or would, if he did testify, he wanted to do so publicly, which is, to say the least, unlikely.
What is the state of the overall investigation from the January 6th committee? How many subpoenas have been issued and how many more expected?
Well, right now we're really just seeing the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there are over 36 subpoenas that we know of publicly, there's as many as 200 witnesses that committee members say that they've interviewed privately behind closed doors, and there still could be far more to come here. This is quite a wide-ranging investigation. As we speak right now, a round of subpoenas went out to leaders of far-right groups like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, groups that are implicated in some of the violence leading up to and around January 6th. And so, this shows that in addition to, events inside the Capitol, they're looking at, domestic extremism more broadly. And so there could still be far more to come here.
Has the committee said when they want to end the investigation, issue a final report?
Yes. The committee chair, Benny Thompson, has talked up a spring 2022 deadline. And in addition to that, Democrats in Congress are really running up against the clock here, with Republicans widely expected to take control of the House next year. A committee like this is probably one of the things in their chopping block. So they're really trying to wrap things up before then.
Nicholas Wu covers Congress for Politico. Find his stories at Politico.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Associated Press reporting from Charlottesville, Virginia. In a mixed verdict, a jury awarded more than $25 million in damages Tuesday against white nationalist leaders for violence that erupted during the 2017 Unite the Right rally. After a nearly month-long civil trial, a jury in U.S. District Court in Charlottesville deadlocked on 2 key claims but found the white nationalists liable on 4 other counts in the lawsuit, filed by 9 people who suffered physical or emotional injuries during the 2 days of demonstrations. This is Washington Today. From CNN, the Biden administration is weighing sending military advisors and new equipment, including weaponry, to Ukraine, as Russia builds up forces near the border and U.S. officials prepare allies for the possibility of another Russian invasion. Multiple sources familiar with the deliberations tell CNN. The article goes on, the discussions about the proposed lethal aid package are happening as Ukraine has begun to warn publicly that an invasion could happen as soon as January. The package could include new Javelin, anti-tank, and anti-armor missiles, as well as mortars, the sources said. Questions today at the U.S. State Department briefing and spokesperson Ned Price.
Is there any discussion, decision, or imminent decision about sending more weapons to Ukraine as they often request?
Well, as you know, we are in regular consultation and dialogue with our Ukrainian partners about their defensive needs. We don't have anything to announce or preview at this time, but we announced that we'd be sending more than $60 million in security assistance during President Zelensky's visit to the U.S. earlier this year, in late August, I believe it was, as part of our strategic partnership with Ukraine. And we've sent more than $400 million overall this year to support Ukraine's sovereignty. Since the beginning of this administration, we've demonstrated that we are willing and able to use a number of tools to address Russia's harmful activities, and we won't hesitate from making use of those tools as appropriate in the future as well. Andrea.
What do you draw from the fact that Russia so far is ignoring all of this pressure, all of your calls, all of the international diplomacy?
Well, again, we don't know Russia's intentions. We don't know precisely what Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin might be planning. But we do know a couple things. We do know what has been observed, including in public accounts about this unusual Russian military activity along the border. We do know the history, and that history is not at all reassuring in terms of previous steps that the Russian Federation took in 2014 that in some ways looked at least similar to this and led to an outcome that was deeply disturbing in terms of the military aggression against Ukraine. So we are taking all of that. We are comparing what is in what we have in our holdings. We are sharing information. We are sharing intelligence with our European allies, with Ukraine as well. Of course, the foreign minister was here just the other week and had an opportunity to meet directly with Secretary Blinken and his team, just as Secretary Blinken had an opportunity to meet, as did President Biden, with President Zelensky in Scotland at COP26. We also saw the foreign minister at COP26, where this was a subject as well. So it is not for us to say what the Russian Federation may be planning. It is for us to say what we're doing in response. And we are engaged in concerted diplomacy. We are making sure through a number of ways that our European allies know, that Ukraine knows, and importantly that the Russian Federation knows that our commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, to its independence, to its territorial integrity is rock solid.
Ned Price is the spokesperson at the State Department, briefing reporters in the State Department briefing room. From Reuters, the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa said on Tuesday that nascent progress toward getting all parties in Ethiopia's conflict into negotiations on ceasefire risks being outpaced by an alarming increase in military operations. Envoy Jeffrey Feltman briefed reporters in Washington after returning on Monday from Ethiopia, where he met the prime minister and discussed a potential diplomatic solution to the year-old conflict, which has killed thousands and displaced millions in Africa's second most populous nation. Jeffrey Feltman held a teleconference.
The basis for talks to lead to de-escalation and a negotiated ceasefire exists. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy told me again on Sunday that his top priority is to get the Tigrayan Defense Forces and the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TDF and the TPLF, out of the lands that they have occupied in the states of Amhara and Afar and get them back into Tigray. We share that objective. The TDF and TPLF leaders that we have engaged tell us that their top priority is to break the de facto humanitarian siege that the government of Ethiopia has imposed on Tigray since July. We share that objective as well. And the two sides have given the same message to a number of other diplomats and leaders, including former Nigerian President Obasanjo, who, as you all know, serves as the African Union's High Representative for the Horn of Africa. The basic point is that these two objectives are not mutually exclusive. With political will, one can achieve both. Unfortunately, each side's trying to achieve its goal by military force. And each side seems to believe that it's on the cusp of winning. After more than a year of fighting and hundreds of thousands of casualties and people displaced by fighting, it should be clear that there is no military solution. The government must remove the shackles that are hindering humanitarian relief and stop offensive military actions, and the TDF must halt its advance on Addis. All those in need, regardless of ethnicity or geography, should have immediate access to life-saving humanitarian assistance, and we call for an immediate end to human rights abuses and violations. Our goal is to support diplomacy as the first, as the last, and as the only approach to address the underlying causes of this conflict. We are not taking sides here. Rumors that we are supporting one side are simply false. We have no intention of any engagement except diplomatic engagement on behalf of international efforts to promote a political process. Ethiopia's neighbors, the African Union, the United Nations, and the international community all agree. There is no time to waste in pivoting to diplomacy.
Jeffrey Feltman is U.S. Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, briefing reporters on a teleconference today. The U.S., Germany, France, and the United Nations all ordering their citizens and staff and the family members to leave Ethiopia immediately as the Tigrayan rebels move closer to the capital, Addis Ababa. And on Monday, the Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, announced that he's going to lead from the battlefield in the war estimated to have killed tens of thousands of people. From the Guardian newspaper in Great Britain, Boris Johnson is physically well and has a grasp on the prime ministership, Downing Street has said, following his rambling speech to business leaders on Monday, in which he lost his place for about 20 seconds. People who watched the speech Johnson gave to the Confederation of British Industry conference were impressed with it, his spokesman argued, adding that cabinet ministers could speak freely if they had any concerns. The speech included a vocal impression of a revving car engine and a section on the lessons for capitalism and officialdom presented by the children's cartoon character Peppa Pig, prompted worries from a number of Tory MPs. That was from The Guardian. Here's a minute of the speech as he talked about Peppa.
I don't know if you've been to Peppa Pig World. Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World. Not enough. I was a bit hazy what I would find at Peppa Pig World, but I loved it. And Peppa Pig World is very much my kind of place. It has very safe streets, discipline in schools, heavy emphasis on new mass transit systems, I notice, even if they're a bit stereotypical about Daddy Pig. But the real lesson for me, going to Peppa Pig World, and I'm surprised you haven't been there, was about the power of UK creativity.
After Prime Minister Boris Johnson's speech, the question from a reporter from ITV Monday night.
You lost your notes, you lost your place, you went off on a tangent about Peppa Pig. In your speech to the CBI, you lost your notes, you lost your place, you went off on a tangent about Peppa Pig. Frankly, is everything okay?
I think that people got the vast majority of the points I wanted to make, and I thought it went over well.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson leads the Conservative Party. The leader of the Liberal Democrats in Britain, Ed Davey, quoted as saying businesses are crying out for clarity. Instead, all they got was Boris Johnson rambling on about Peppa Pig. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today. For more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls live, on the air, on the news of the day. And we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Wednesday morning, we'll talk about rail infrastructure and the future of Amtrak with its president, Stephen Gardner. Then Zero Emission Transportation Association's Joe Britton on how electric vehicles factor into the Biden administration's clean energy goals. And Reuters reporter David Shepardson talks about the state of the airline industry at the start of the holiday travel season. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.